All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hive Live. I'm Alex Nette, and today you're joining in on an exciting roundtable discussion. We're talking about the cybersecurity trends shaping the future of cloud service providers. So, whether your company is providing cloud based services to your customers or you're looking at obtaining cloud based services, there are cybersecurity considerations you should be watching out for. And considering that cloud and cloud based services can include everything from bookkeeping to file storage to email to human resources and everything in between, the need for understanding cybersecurity considerations is pressing now more than ever. Well, joining me today for our discussion is Brad Thies. As founder and president of BARR Advisory, Brad leads all aspects of the organization's global client service delivery and security assessment services, including SOC, ISO, PCI, NIST, and HIPAA examinations. Under Brad's leadership, BARR has become one of the most sought after third party assessors and CISO advisors in the cloud computing space, serving high growth startups to Fortune 1000 companies in the most regulated industries, including technology, financial services, healthcare, and government. Brad, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Alex. Thanks for having me today.
I'm excited to talk with Brad and to have this discussion. Of course, for those of you watching live, you can input your questions here on the platform and we will answer them as we move through. But there are a couple places we really want to start this discussion. And I think the first and most pressing is, what is a cloud service provider? And Brad, I might put that question to you first. When we talk about CSPs, what does that generally mean to you? And maybe what are some examples?
Yeah, that's always a good start to just define, what it is. What is the cloud? It can mean many different things. I like to use the road analogy. That's at least helpful for me, at least when I first started learning about this stuff way back in the day. And keep in mind the cloud is nothing new. It's just a little bit shift in where information is processed. But if you think of the road analogy, you've got the people and goods that are traversing the roads. You have the actual roads themselves. And then you have the vehicles that are transporting these people and goods. And so there's the SaaS, the software as a service, which those are really acting as the people and goods. Those would be things like your Box, your G Suite, Google Workplace, Office 365s of the world, Workday, that are really, that is the goods and that has the information. Then you have the infrastructure as a service. That's really looking at what the roads are. It's what's the infrastructure that's supporting the transport aspect of it. And that would be things like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google, which would be the top three in the space. DigitalOcean's another one. And then going into the vehicles itself, and that would be things like these DevOps models or platform as a service. And those would be things like, GitHub that has some of the code that's being deployed, Heroku, Docker, even Microsoft Azure has some of these things. So that would be more the platform as a service. So that's really how we define, what the cloud is. There's some formal definitions out on NIST, but I like to think of it as really that road analogy.
I think that's a great analogy, and definitely one of the biggest things that when we look at the world of cybersecurity, it can be confusing about what falls into some of these categories, and sometimes these analogies are a great way to kind of bridge that gap in understanding. Obviously, from a cloud service provider standpoint, right, there are many tools out there. Some you're familiar with, some you might not be. But especially within the cybersecurity space, there's been a large number of cloud service tools that have come into place recently. And so as we've started to look into those more, a couple I can think of offhand, there are things like network monitoring, so tools that might be cloud-based in terms of that single pane of glass for you to understand what's happening on your network. There are cloud access security brokers, which help manage all of your access and authentication across your myriad of cloud tools. And that's becoming more critical, though complicated to deploy. I think, kind of coming in from another standpoint, thinking about reliability as well, when we think about major cloud infrastructure providers like AWS or Google or any of these other providers, they focus on that reliability and, more importantly, that availability of your information. Brad, what other ones am I missing here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a plethora of tools out there, and when you think about information security, it's about that visibility. I think that's almost synonymous. If you don't have visibility into your environment, then you can't really know if you got a secure posture, even a compliance posture. And so those monitoring tools hit the nail on the head. Within cloud platforms, there's some native tools that they just come out of the box with. You can just spin up an AWS environment and put something like what's called a guard duty in place, and they, defaults tells you where a lot of your vulnerabilities and weaknesses might be. But I think in this day, with the rapid development and deployment of applications, the DevOps space is becoming a huge part of really integrating with the cloud. And so those are some tools that I feel like need to be better understood because of the risk that they pose and how much surface they can touch. And so I encourage people to reference digital.ai. They have a great periodic table of all the different types of DevOps tools that are out there that you can call it a bolt-on or integrate within your cloud environment. Whether you're a service provider or a SMB leveraging the cloud. So I think the last thing that I'll say, in addition to the DevOps tools, is I think back to what the risks are. And when you look at some of the Verizon breach reports, 8 out of 10 hacks typically start with compromised credentials. And so why not have a tool that helps you manage those credentials? And so things like key and credential management, like Okta with identity management, there's some key management aspects within these native tools. And so those are some great security tools that I would highly encourage, in addition to just thinking about procuring cloud services in itself.
That's a good point. And I think it definitely touches back on, as this increasing buzzword falls into our lexicon, a number of conversations with probably our customers and clients around the zero trust model. Mm-hmm. And I think that really comes back to a big piece of it being around that identification, authentication, and authorization piece of the puzzle.
And that was a big piece of the White House executive order that just got released. It had zero trust model all over it.
They did. They stuck a bunch of that. I will ask you for your quick thoughts on that. What did you think about it as a whole?
Well, I think it's going to encourage some great debate about things. But I think what highlighted is in that order is everything from, they talked about supply chain risk. They talked about the need for transparency in itself. And security's always typically been kind of, hey, we're in this network, and if you're trying to sell services or you're trying to procure services, you don't want to have any security issues. But that transparency aspect of it then makes it harder. There's more punishment for telling others your faults versus thinking that those faults can actually turn into opportunities to protect the ecosystem. So I love the fact that the executive order encouraged more transparency in security, and that's going to make it a little bit easier to understand. We'll talk about it in a minute about how to translate all this complexity with compliance and security. But the other thing that I thought was great is I just recognized the cloud first initiatives that are going on, not only in the government space, but also in several of the private sector as well, is pushing more workloads and data into the cloud.
Yeah, I think it was very interesting in terms of what it was trying to achieve. Obviously, there are a number of federal initiatives to work more with providers out in the private sector, whether through the FedRAMP initiative or the newest one, CMMC, for Department of Defense related groups. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I know there's a 6-month horizon here for some things getting released to see kind of what sort of teeth it has. So I do think it will be interesting. But you did touch on something critical there, which I think is for a lot of companies. If you're a small and medium-sized business, what does it mean to use a cloud service provider? And I think one of the big things for both smaller businesses and larger businesses for a long time, to include the largest business, the federal government, it was a question of, is the cloud secure, right? Is it worth going to the cloud? Is my data safe there? And it's kind of been a real fundamental and monumental shift from saying it's absolutely not trustworthy to we should go all in. Do you think that's a mistake for kind of that knee-jerk rush? Or do you think we've reached a point that if you're an SMB and you want to move to the cloud, that we are at a more secure spot?
Well, there's the feeling of security and there's the reality of security. And I think most times you might feel secure and you're not really. And then there's the vice versa. But I think over the past, 10, 15 years, as the cloud has really become saturated more. There's just more. It's more of a feeling of insecurity. When the reality of it is, it's just a different shift in mindset, different skill sets that are needed to operate and manage these cloud workloads. That really gets the reality of it. It's a skills gap, not necessarily an actual gap in these providers having lack of security. And that's really what we'll talk about a little bit later on in the shared responsibility model of drawing the line in the sand for who's responsible for what is what needs to be tackled.
What do you think are, for small and medium-sized businesses who are looking at moving to a cloud service provider? And again, this includes anything that's available online that stores your information somewhere else that's not, in your office or in a dusty server that's sitting in your closet. As we kind of look at some of the risks for that and for businesses who are evaluating moving to the cloud, what are some of those most relevant risks for them as they're evaluating, or as they move to the cloud? What could go wrong, and what are they maybe not thinking about?
Yeah, anytime you talk about risks from a small SMB, we can talk about all the security risks, but it first starts with what's your core competency. As an SMB, is your core competency managing infrastructure, managing SaaS applications? And oh, by the way, your customers expect these development of these applications at the speed of light now. And so is your core competency really managing that? Or is it more advantageous to get, with some of the program, especially as we look at some of the research out there? O'Reilly recently had surveyed companies, and 25% of the respondents said that in 2021, all of their information, their workloads are going to move 100% to the cloud environment. That's not just small companies. This is 17% of those respondents were large enterprises. But then with that, what are some other risks? Because there's the skills gap that I mentioned first. First of all, that's when you get to the reality and the feeling of security. The risk is you don't have the folks that can actually manage and shift ways from going from you have full control to then how are you actually evaluating these cloud service providers? And then there's the risks of now that everything's going to a public environment or public cloud, that you have a misconfiguration. You've heard of this, the horror stories of an S3 bucket that gets exposed to the world and then a bunch of data gets leaked. And so that's just one example of risks that are out there that maybe some of these skills gap could have resolved, or having some of these monitoring tools that we talked about before, making sure that they're looking at some of these configurations in a different way that you might think of in a traditional closed network environment.
I do agree with that. And as we think about the world of cloud service providers generally, right, it's the goal is to make it as easy and accessible to as many people as possible. And you're right, I think that skills gap plays a huge piece in that from a cybersecurity perspective, because oftentimes cloud service providers like AWS have made their tools just work. They want businesses to come and use them, have them be successful, and transform their business into the cloud. But that does not always mean that it works securely. And so, in those examples, the S3 buckets, generally, they want to open up the permissions so that it works right out of the box. But of course, if that box is inherently insecure, or that's not your intended choice for the functionality, you of course end up with an S3 bucket that is leaking data over the internet. And you end up in a situation like many businesses that have been exposed to that, including things, though more complicated, like Capital One, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I think that takes us right into the next one, which is flipping the script. For CSPs and cloud service providers that are providing a service. If your company offers a service to consumers, whether that is something that is a SaaS-based product or anywhere in between, what does that look like from a cybersecurity perspective? And I think one of the big things here as we kind of look at this for these cloud service providers is, there's obviously a value proposition to customers. Hey, we offer an easy to use, intuitive service for storing files, managing payroll, whatever. But how can those companies who are providing those services help add some layers of trust as part of their value proposition to their customers? What can they do to help customers understand that they are secure or invested in security?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the trust is a big part of this, and there's a lot of conversations about, well, if you get a SOC report, if you get ISO certified, or if you have these different compliance attestations, then okay, we're good. But it can't stop there, and that's where you have to have an additional conversation about security. And I think if you look at security and really focus on continuous improvement, which compliance does have some of that aspect of it, but you can't stop there at just what's written in the letter of the law, because those were rules that were created somewhat flexible and up for interpretation. And so compliance doesn't equal security, but security can equal compliance. But in essence, compliance plus security is what you really get to that trust aspect of it. And I think for starters, not only in addition to, if you're a cloud service provider, doing these certifications and attestation reports to demonstrate that you're bought in with this, but go beyond that and have guides to how to use your system in a way. CIS, Center for Internet Security, has great benchmarks out there on a plethora of cloud service providers and apps and of those nature that can help users better harden these services that they're using. So that's a good starting point. But if you're the cloud service provider, think of it as the IKEA approach to it. If you're shipping everything in a box and you forget to add the instructions on how to put things together, you're missing it completely. And so go above and beyond just the baseline compliance reporting. Make sure you're establishing features in your product that make and empower your users to put security in based off their needs.
I'm super disappointed there was no meatballs involved in that analogy, and I'm not sure if we can work that in some way. I very much agree with that. I think that a big part of it, right? We write all these user guides for how to use your platform. Here's how to file people's HR paperwork. Here's how to file a new invoice. Here's how to store data or share data. We've made it super easy, and we roll out YouTube videos and everything else around that. And I think for a lot of cloud service providers, they continue to invest in security tools, including connections with other security cloud service providers like CASB brokers or other, DDoS protections. And so they'll put all that into place, but oftentimes that isn't necessarily communicated. And I think it ends up at a point where it's more of like if you want to know, we have it, rather than letting people know that it's something that is available and they should pursue it. And so you're right. It's kind of like, hey, here's your box with your instructions. Maybe there's a picture and you can kind of figure out how to put it together as intended, but maybe you're missing some critical components like maybe securing the thing to the wall so that your drawers don't tip over when you pull them out. Might be a good way of kind of looking at the security analogy piece of that. And I think, sorry, I couldn't work in the meatball analogy there. I could only work in the IKEA thing. But I think that's a key piece of the puzzle, is having more information about some of these security tools and things that are available to customers as a cloud service provider. And oftentimes, if you as a cloud service provider have invested in those tools, let people know that they're available. Let them find out how to use them appropriately. And more importantly, if you think you're lacking in a specific area, I think it's going to become the norm here in the future to have that stuff available. When evaluating certain products now, it's not always just about the business functionality about that product and whether it meets the business use case, but from a security perspective, and for companies who have security teams, they're going to have explicit requirements. Brad, as you probably know, things like encryption, specific authentication mechanisms, making sure that data is protected in transit and at rest, making sure that only specific third parties have access to the information or no third parties have access. What are some things I'm missing that usually we think about from a third-party evaluation?
Well, there's geographic locations as well, depending upon, what some of the privacy rules you have to adhere to. There's then just the baselines. How do you speak the language in itself to your customers, depending upon the industry that they're in? So as a cloud service provider, usually you can be an industry agnostic because I have this great software as a service or infrastructure as a service solution. But if you're dealing with healthcare, if you're dealing with financial services, if you're dealing with government, they might have a different lens on things. So and different standards that they have to comply with. And so knowing how to speak that language in your feature set so that you're not just saying, oh, we're rotating encryption keys or we're hardening it based off this, what we think is a standard. How do you translate that into the actual government standard in itself, so that you're speaking the language across your industries that you're working with.
I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle, and we encounter this often, for small business or really any business that's working with a cloud service provider. We have to find a common lexicon about how to evaluate their security options and overall investments in security. But for cloud service providers, you need to be prepared to receive those questions and have the answers associated with it, which I think takes us nicely to our final part here. Ultimately, a shared responsibility between cloud service providers and your business. Of course, if you are a cloud service provider, you're on the other end of that hook. What are some good ways to kind of think about this shared responsibility model, Brad? How do we kind of look at assessing who's responsible for what? Is there a clear delineation or a common delineation of responsibilities? Does it vary? How does that usually look?
Well, it varies, and I think it starts with if you're a user looking to go to a cloud service, and that service does not have some type of shared responsibility model white paper in there, then there's an issue with that. But the most simple way of explaining this is AWS's way, is that AWS is responsible for of the cloud, but then you're responsible for what's in the cloud. And so what does that mean can really run the spectrum of depending upon the services that you're using. So that's the starting point. And it's just looking at that, that overlap of who's responsible for what and what tools you're turning on.
I think you're right. I think it does depend on the service, right? Some services, those SaaS-based models, like you talked about, generally control more of the risk, I think. And so as a consumer using those products, you are offsetting some of that risk or deferring the risk to the cloud service provider. If you are a cloud service provider and you're offering a SaaS-based solution, something that's maybe presented through the web and does everything, you are taking on all of that risk. So it's not just the risk to your company, but you are taking on the risk from the customers and your clients that are leveraging your SaaS-based platform. So if you're not thinking about that risk and managing that risk appropriately, when something does go wrong, maybe a data breach on your behalf, maybe you miss some patches and you have a distributed denial of service attack or a DDoS attack, that ends up falling on you. And so making sure that you're investing enough to reduce that risk can be a huge piece of that puzzle. I think, one of the big things we look at generally is around frameworks. There are a number of frameworks out there like ISO or NIST, Cybersecurity Framework, or any of these other ones that actually can help evaluate and understand what a good cybersecurity program and framework looks like. And a good way then to kind of sit down is check the boxes, see whether the cloud service provider or your business is responsible or vice versa. Which things are you as a cloud service provider going to take care of for your customers, and which ones are explicitly on them? A great example, this might be around that kind of authentication piece. For example, you as a cloud service provider would manage all of your users. So your admins on the back end, maybe who are working in the client tenants or managing the infrastructure, you handle those people. But as far as your customers, you can't know who has or who needs access to a customer's data. That would be up to them to decide. So whether it's their HR person or their individual contributors throughout the company, that's up to them to make those decisions. In that case, that would be a shared responsibility model between that. But maybe when it comes to things like operating system patching, that ends up being on you as the cloud service provider because the customer has no control over that. And I think this is one of the areas that, while it seems very intuitive and easy, it kind of gets left in the dirt a lot. And it's not super cool. It's not very fun. But I think sitting down and understanding that can help not only inform what the actual risk profile of using the cloud is, but maybe if there's other tools, if you're a small or medium-sized business or even a cloud service provider, what cybersecurity tools you might be able to need to supplement that and reduce that risk. So if you are having trouble managing maybe passwords, or if you're having trouble with DDoS, you'll now know, hey, I'm having this problem. I can make an informed decision about what tech I need to buy to maybe support that and ultimately reduce my risk.
Yeah, I mean, the old adage goes, you can delegate everything but accountability. And yes, you can delegate more responsibility the further up the stack you go with like software as a service, but it's still your information. It's still your data, and making sure you're doing the due diligence for that shared responsibility model.
I think that was a great point. Well, the good news today, too, is that we actually have an announcement between Brad and I. Wanted to let you guys know that before we wrap, it's my pleasure to announce that Hive Systems is actually officially partnered with BARR Advisory. And our goal is to fully optimize a comprehensive cybersecurity solution for businesses looking to build or enhance their organization's cybersecurity programs. This partnership uses BARR's compliance expertise and Brad's compliance expertise around this, which allows organizations to meet and exceed industry and regulatory requirements and put them at a competitive advantage. So, as Brad was talking about, compliance isn't always just the main thing you need to do, but you can use it to have an informed cybersecurity strategy. From Hive Systems, we offer cybersecurity strategy, security assessments, security awareness training, and more. Um, I think from my side, founding Hive Systems, our goal was to make cybersecurity approachable, and Brad handles and looks at cybersecurity very much the same way, which is why this has been a very easy conversation from my side, and we're excited to be part of this.
Yeah, Alex, we're excited about the partnership, and it falls just in line with our mission as well to secure the world. And when you have that baseline safety and security, anything's possible, and we can't do it without the partnerships like you guys.
That's wonderful. Well, we are almost out of time. Brad, did you have any other thoughts about what cloud service providers can do? And from a cybersecurity side, where do you think the future holds in the next maybe 2 to 5 years?
Well, I think it's no longer an emerging tech as much as people like to think so. And the surveys out there are clear. Things are moving to the cloud, but then there's the concept of is history repeating itself? As everything's being pushed to more of a centralized, processing model like the cloud environment, we have to get security right, because then eventually another emerging trend is going to happen where we're going to push the processing and compute power more closer to home with the Internet of Things and edge computing, those types of concepts. And cloud's going to be a big part of that to enable not only the processing power to go from centralized and then back to closer to home with Internet of Things. You have to get the security right at the onset to empower those business functions to happen. So
you could say
things are going to change.
Yeah, and I think it continues to kind of bounce back and forth. You could say that the meatball rolls both ways. I don't know. Somehow I worked it in.
I see what you did there.
Well, Brad, that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank Brad for joining us and providing his thoughts on cybersecurity's impacts on the future of cloud service providers. I really enjoyed his analysis about the skills gap that exists, both around cybersecurity and ultimately about managing the cloud. There are a lot of good trainings out there from a lot of the big cloud service providers like AWS. If you are looking to increase your skills or upskill from your general IT knowledge, we'd recommend you go out there and look at it. As Brad and I both know, there is a huge deficit in the cybersecurity workforce today. And we're always looking for more people to join and be part of our organizations and really the cybersecurity industry at large. If you ever have any questions, of course, you can go online and check out BARR Advisory's website at barradvisory.com or our website at hivesystems.io. Also, make sure to sign up for our next Hive Live event at www.hivesystems.io/Hive Live. Next month's guest is Andrew Bradley. We're going to be talking about blockchain, cryptocurrency, and their impact on the world of cybersecurity. So make sure you don't miss it by signing up again at hivesystems.io/Hive Live. Brad, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
Wonderful. Until next time, remember, when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to act and not react. Thank you.